Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are unpacking every layer of the incredible novel, Gulliver's Travels. Get ready for a deep dive into its characters, themes, and the hidden meanings behind the story. We're setting off on quite a journey today, literary speaking, of course, starting with Part 1, A Voyage to Lilliput. And our main guy, Lemuel Gulliver, he doesn't exactly burst onto the scene looking for adventure. His beginnings are, well, pretty humble, quite practical, actually.
Right. We first meet him as a surgeon. He does an apprenticeship with a Mr. James Bates in London. Lasts about 4 years.
But even then, there's something different about him. He uses money from his father, not just for the medical stuff, but also to study navigation, maths, things you'd need for sea voyages.
Exactly. He's already thinking ahead, anticipating that life at sea. And after the apprenticeship, he pops over to Leiden in Holland to study physics more deeply. Specifically, to prepare for those long trips he felt drawn to.
So he's really actively shaping his own path, isn't he? Even if he doesn't quite know where it's leading yet.
Definitely. And what's really interesting, I think, is his attempt to just settle down. After all that prep for the sea, he comes back from Leiden, sets up a practice right there in London, gets married to Mrs. Mary Burton. Seems pretty standard.
Yeah, the conventional life. But it doesn't stick, does it?
No, his business fails pretty quickly. And the reason he gives is really telling. He says his conscience wouldn't let him get involved in the bad practice common among, well, his medical colleagues.
So that's not just a throwaway detail. It's like fundamental to his character.
I think so.
Yeah.
It establishes this pattern. He tries the normal thing, but fails. Maybe because he's too principled. Or maybe just fundamentally out of sync with, the everyday compromises and maybe corruptions of society.
And that failure just pushes him right back to the sea.
Exactly. Back to the path he was probably always meant for, driven by this kind of quiet, almost moral restlessness.
And it's that restlessness, that push back to the sea, that really kicks off the whole adventure, right? His first big voyage as a surgeon is on the Swallow.
And it takes a very dramatic turn. They run into a massive storm, get blown way off course, somewhere northwest of Van Diemen's Land, which is Tasmania now.
Conditions on board sound grim.
Horrific. The crew are overworked, the food's bad, lots of them get sick, and bang, thick fog, they hit a rock, and the ship just breaks apart.
And here's the first big twist, the classic setup.
Gulliver's the only one who makes it, sole survivor. He swims and swims until he's completely exhausted, finds land somehow, and just collapses, falls into this incredibly deep sleep.
Leaving him totally alone, vulnerable, ripe for something extraordinary to happen.
Oh, absolutely. And when he wakes up, it's just completely disorienting. He finds himself not just on land, but like pinned down, held fast by hundreds of tiny, tiny strings.
He talks about feeling the pricking of above 100 arrows, like needles.
Yeah, tiny arrows. And when he instinctively tries to free his arm, or even his hair, these little figures around him start shouting, Tolgo Phonak, a warning, basically, from creatures he can barely even see properly.
It just instantly establishes that massive shift in scale. The big explorer is suddenly this helpless giant.
Completely helpless, and the practicalities hit him fast. He's starving, incredibly thirsty. Remember, he hadn't eaten for hours before the shipwreck.
Right, so how does he even communicate that?
Basic human instinct. He just keeps pointing his finger to his mouth, signaling to one of the figures who seems to be in charge, a hergo, they call him, like a lord. It's primal. It works.
And their response is surprisingly organized.
Remarkably so. Over 100 of these tiny inhabitants climb up ladders to reach his mouth. They've got baskets of miniature meats, he actually describes them, like tiny bits of mutton and lark wings, all perfectly prepared.
Wow, and drink.
They bring him these 2 little barrels, hogsheads he calls them, but they're barely bigger than a thimble to him, full of this delicious wine, like Burgundy, he says. Strong stuff, too, puts him to sleep later.
And they're shouting something when he drinks.
Yeah, a keenet de goal, like a cheer, celebration. So this first encounter, even though he's a prisoner, it shows their ingenuity, their collective action, and actually a surprising sort of benevolence towards this huge creature they've captured.
This amazing feat of tiny logistics doesn't go unnoticed by the higher-ups, I take it.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The emperor gets word pretty fast. There's a council meeting, and they decide, okay, keep him tied up, keep feeding him, but we need to move him. Prepare a machine to transport him to the capital city.
And Gulliver actually sees this as prudent and generous, even though he's captive.
Yeah, from his perspective, given the circumstances, he seems impressed by their caution, their calculated approach. They didn't just kill him on sight. Right?
True. And the machine they build, it's incredible.
Astounding, really. They call it the greatest engine they have. It's this huge wooden frame on 22 wheels, and it takes 1,500 of their biggest horses, each only about 4.5 inches high, to pull it.
1,500, just imagine that. And how do they get him onto it?
Even more complex. They set up 80 poles, maybe a foot high each, use strong cords like pack thread, hook him onto bandages around his body, and then 900 of their strongest men use pulleys to hoist him up.
While he's asleep.
Exactly. They slipped something soporific into his wine earlier. So this massive, complex operation happens while he's completely out cold. It shows their meticulous planning, but also maybe their deep scientific curiosity about him.
Imagine waking up during that whole procession.
Well, he does get woken up, but in a slightly funnier way. About 4 hours into the journey, the carriage stops. A couple of curious young locals, including an officer from the guards apparently, sneak onto the engine to get a better look.
Oh.
And one of them, just being mischievous, takes the little half-pike and tickles Gulliver's left nostril.
Ooh.
Yeah, causes this massive violent sneeze from Gulliver. The little guy's vanished instantly, of course. Takes Gulliver weeks to figure out what actually woke him up.
That's brilliant. Just underscores the absurdity. Even kids can mess with the man-mountain.
Absolutely. Yeah. So eventually, after this long march, he arrives near the capital, maybe 200 yards from the city gates. The emperor himself, the whole court, they all come out to see him arrive. It's a grand reception for a prisoner.
And where do they keep him? Can't exactly put him in a normal jail cell?
No, they lodge him in an ancient temple, the largest building in the whole kingdom, apparently. But he's still confined. His left leg is chained with, get this, 36 padlocks, attached to 91 separate chains.
And 81 chains.
Yeah, he says they're like the chains on a lady's watch, just, scaled up proportionally. It just shows how thorough they are, how cautiously they're managing this huge, potentially dangerous being.
So he's settled in, chained up in a temple. But Gulliver's pretty resourceful, isn't he? He starts trying to win them over.
Immediately. There's this incident where some troublemakers who shot arrows at him earlier are brought to him, bound. He does this whole performance, makes a show of pretending he's going to eat one of them. Yeah. Then, dramatically, he pulls out his knife, cuts their bonds, and sets them free. A calculated act of mercy.
And it works.
Like a charm. Word gets back to the court, reported very much to his advantage, he says. It really helps shift perception, shows he's not just a mindless giant. He's strategic, even in captivity.
And this act of clemency kind of opens the door for him, makes them more comfortable.
It definitely paves the way. Orders come down to make him more comfortable. They sew together 600 of their beds to make one mattress for him. 300 tailors get assigned to make him clothes in their style.
300 tailors.
Yeah. And 6 top scholars are tasked with teaching him the Lilliputian language. They even start exercising the royal horses near him every day, just to get the animals used to his size.
It's an incredible effort on their part. Shows their curiosity, their practicality, and maybe a bit of fear still.
A mix of all those things, I think. And this period gives us that fantastic scene, the search of the Man Mountain.
Oh, right, the inventory.
Exactly. The emperor wants to know what's in Gulliver's pockets. So 2 officials, Clefrin Freelock and Marcy Freelock, perform this meticulous search and write up a detailed list.
And from their perspective, his stuff is just bizarre.
Completely. His handkerchief is big enough to be a carpet for the emperor's main room. He's got a huge silver chest, probably his snuff box. And his watch, they think it's an oracle because he keeps consulting it. They note he seldom did anything without consulting it.
That's hilarious. What else?
His purse full of gold coins, which are useless to them. His comb, which they see as some kind of giant engine with 20 poles. His pistol is a hollow iron pillar. And his sword, his scimitar, is just this massive, terrifying weapon.
It's such brilliant satire, isn't it? Just showing how perspective completely changes things.
Absolutely. It's Swift at his best.
Yeah.
And Gulliver tries to explain his sword and pistols. He even fires one off just with powder, which obviously terrifies and amazes them.
And the watch continues to baffle them.
Totally. The constant ticking, the moving minute hand. Their scholars come up with all sorts of various and remote theories, but they just can't figure out its actual purpose. An everyday object becomes this profound mystery purely because of the scale difference, shows the limits of understanding when faced with something truly alien.
And their own court life, their entertainment, it's also pretty revealing, satirically speaking.
Oh, very much so. Gulliver watches these rope dancers, And it turns out these aren't just performers, they're candidates for high office and court favor.
Seriously, like political positions depend on tightrope walking.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And the emperor also gives out awards, these 3 fine silken threads, blue, red, and green, to nobles who are best at leaping over a stick or creeping under it.
So political skill is literally about jumping through hoops and bending over backwards.
Precisely. It's incredibly sharp satire on the corruption and, frankly, the absurdity of court politics, where favor and advancement depend on agility and sycophancy, not actual merit or wisdom. Swift is definitely poking fun at the courts of his own time there.
And Gulliver himself becomes part of the entertainment circuit.
He does. He puts on shows for the emperor, stages these mock military exercises where the entire Lilliputian army marches between his legs. He even gets the empress to come out and watch.
It's such a powerful image, his sheer size dominating their world, even if it's just for amusement.
It is. But this leads us right into the core of Lilliputian politics, which Swift just skewers brilliantly.
By factions, right?
Yeah, the 2 main political parties.
Yeah.
The Tremixen, who wear high heels, and the Slamixen, who wear low heels.
High heels versus low heels. That's the big political divide.
That's it. And their hatred for each other is intense.
Yeah.
They won't eat together, drink together, won't even speak to each other, all based on the height of their shoe heels.
Utterly absurd.
Utterly absurd. It's Swift holding up a mirror to real-world political divisions, showing how often they're based on things that are fundamentally trivial, masking deeper conflicts or just plain stubbornness.
And the satire goes even deeper with the war, doesn't it? The war with Blefuscu.
Oh, the War of the Eggs. This is a huge satirical point. It's this long, bloody, ongoing war with the neighboring empire, Blefuscu. And the entire conflict started.
Over how to break an egg.
Exactly. A religious dispute over whether you should break the egg at the big end or the little end. That's the origin.
You couldn't make it up. Well, Swift did.
He did. And the big Endian exiles, the ones who insisted on breaking the big end, fled to Blefuscu and got support there, constantly fueling the war. It's genius satire because it takes something so utterly insignificant and makes it the cause of generations of bloodshed.
It forces you to question. Are our own real-world conflicts, our religious wars, our ideological battles, are they fundamentally any more rational than breaking an egg?
That's exactly the question Swift wants us to ask. It's a devastating critique of dogma, intolerance, and the sheer absurdity that often underlies human conflict.
And Gulliver the Giant becomes the key weapon in this ridiculous war.
He does. His military contribution is legendary, in Lilliputian terms. He decides the whole thing almost single-handedly. He just wades across the channel, separating Lilliput and Blefuscu.
Which is probably like, what, a small pond to him?
Pretty much. He fastens hooks to the bows of their warships, ties them all together with cables, and just pulls the entire Blefuscudian fleet back to Lilliput.
The enemy must have been terrified.
Absolutely. They just jump overboard and swim for shore. It's a complete rout, achieved almost effortlessly because of his size. But again, it highlights how immense power can be used for utterly petty or absurd ends.
You'd think this would make him a permanent hero in Lilliput, secure his position forever.
You would think. But here's where things start to turn. Other significant shift. The emperor grants Gulliver permission to visit Blefuscu, but Gulliver notes he does it in a cold manner.
Not a good sign.
Not at all. Gulliver later finds out through court whispers that key figures like Flimnap, the treasurer, and especially Skyresh Bolgolam, the admiral.
The guy whose thunder Gulliver stole with the naval victory.
Exactly. Bolgolam was already his mortal enemy, and now he's even more resentful. They start painting Gulliver's interest in Blefuscu as disaffection, as potential treason.
So his greatest triumph actually sows the seeds of his downfall. The classic irony.
Precisely. The political jealousy and suspicion kick in. Gulliver starts to get, as he puts it, some imperfect idea of courts and ministers. He's learning the hard way about the treachery of politics.
During this time, we also learn more about Lilliputian laws and customs, which seem like a real mix of, well, good intentions and utter corruption.
It's a fascinating contrast. They have some seemingly enlightened laws, like crimes against the state are punished severely, sure. But if you're falsely accused and prove your innocence, your accuser gets punished. That seems fair.
Yeah, accountability.
And they even have this practice called snillpaw, where citizens who follow the laws perfectly for 73 moons get special privileges and rewards, a system for rewarding honesty.
Sounds good on paper.
But then you have the reality. That whole business of getting high office by rook dancing or leaping over sticks, that was apparently introduced by the current emperor's grandfather. So there's been a decline from perhaps more virtuous origins.
Right. And they consider ingratitude a capital crime.
Yes, which is interesting. Their logic is that someone who repays kindness with evil is basically an enemy to all of society, which makes a certain kind of sense, doesn't it?
It does, actually, and their education system is quite something, too.
Very peculiar. Children, except for the poorest laborers, are taken from their parents at just 20 months old, raised in public nurseries, educated specifically for their social station.
They only see their parents twice a year, for an hour.
That's right. And they're kept away from servants to avoid picking up folly and vice. It's incredibly structured, very communal, prioritizing societal order way above family ties. Starkly different.
But while Gulliver is observing all this, the political danger to him is growing, isn't it? That private intrigue.
It's really escalating. He uncovers that a secret council has been meeting for 2 months, specifically to decide his fate. And Skyrush Bolglum, his sworn enemy, is leading the charge, pushing relentlessly for Gulliver's death.
Fueled by envy and fear,
The
presumably.
toxic combination. The success against Blefuscu just intensified Bolglum's hatred. The political knives are definitely out for Gulliver.
And the ways they consider getting rid of him, they're pretty horrific.
Chillingly inventive. One plan is to secretly set fire to his house, the Temple, at night. Then have 20,000 archers armed with poisoned arrows shoot him in the face at hands as he tries to escape.
Good grief.
Another idea, maybe even worse, is to have his own servants secretly apply a poisonous juice to his shirts and sheets. This poison would make him itch uncontrollably, causing him to tear his own flesh and die in agony.
It's just monstrous. Shows the cruelty lurking beneath the surface.
Absolutely. The paranoia and ruthlessness of power, even on this tiny scale. They see him as a threat, even after he saved them, and they're willing to resort to extreme, cruel measures.
Luckily, he has an ally, right?
Reldressel. Yes, thankfully. Reldressel, who's the principal secretary for private affairs and considers himself a friend to Gulliver, argues against execution. He proposes, well, mercy.
Mercy being...
Blinding him, putting out his eyes.
That's mercy.
Reldressel argues it would satisfy justice, make him harmless, and conveniently deal with the great charge of feeding him. They could gradually reduce his food rations, and he'd just sort of waste away in a few months.
That's terrifyingly pragmatic, cold, calculated mercy.
It really highlights the chilling logic that can drive state decisions, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
Gulliver gets wind of this merciful plan.
And he's not exactly keen on being blinded and starved.
Understandably. He recognizes the rashness and inherent untrustworthiness of princes and ministers. He decides very quickly that escape is his only option. His survival instinct kicks in again.
So where does he go? He just defeated their only neighbor.
In a great ironic twist, he flees to Blefuscu, the very empire he conquered for Lilliput.
And they take him in, after he captured their entire navy.
Surprisingly, yes. The Blefuscudian monarch receives him warmly, offers him protection. Maybe they see him as a useful pawn. Or maybe it just shows the fickle nature of alliances in this world.
But the Lilliputians aren't going to just let him go.
Oh no. The Emperor of Lilliput sends an envoy demanding Gulliver's immediate return, bound hand and foot, to be punished as a traitor. They even threaten to strip him of his title, Nardak, which they'd awarded him earlier.
Does Blefuscu give him up?
Nope. The Blefuscudian monarch refuses. He cites the peace treaty they have, insists on hospitality, and basically tells Lilliput to back off.
Yeah.
He reaffirms his protection of Gulliver.
So that's the final break. Gulliver is done with Lilliput.
Completely. And the experience leaves him deeply cynical. He resolves never more to put any confidence in princes or ministers. A harsh lesson learned.
So now he needs to get home. How does he prepare?
Meticulously. He finds an abandoned boat that had drifted ashore, fixes it up, and he stocks it with enormous provisions relative to his hosts anyway. 100 oxen, 300 sheep, plus bread and drink.
And he takes some live animals, too.
He does. 6 cows, 2 bulls, and some sheep. He wants to try and breed these miniature animals back in England. But he's specifically forbidden from taking any Lilliputian or Blefuscudian people, and he gives his word he won't, even if they wanted to come.
Even in Escape, there are still some rules, some sense of honor.
Seems so. So he finally sets sail, September 24th, 1701. He finds a small island, hangs out there for a bit, and then luckily gets spotted and picked up by an English merchant ship, captained by a Mr. John Bedell.
Back to the normal-sized world, but not quite normal for Gulliver anymore.
Not at all. This return journey marks another key perceptual shift. The captain naturally finds Gulliver's stories completely unbelievable at first.
How does Gulliver convince him?
Tangible proof. He pulls out the tiny, live Lilliputian cattle and sheep from his pockets, shows him the Lilliputian gold he was given, a portrait of the Emperor of Blefuscu. That does the trick.
Amazing. So he finally gets back to England.
Yes, June 3rd, 1702, after being away for 5.5 years. But the return itself is jarring for him.
How so?
This is a really subtle but important psychological point. He's been living among kindly people for so long, his perception is warped. When he gets back, English houses, trees, cattle, even people, they all look tiny to him.
He sees his own world as Lilliputian.
Exactly. He's afraid he'll accidentally step on people in the street. When his wife runs out to hug him, he automatically ducks down, thinking she can't possibly reach his mouth. His own children look miniature to him.
Wow, that's a profound psychological impact. It shows how deeply the experience changed him, warped his very sense of scale.
And it lingers for quite a while. It really foreshadows the deeper alienation he'll experience later.
Despite the weirdness, he does okay financially. Sells the tiny animals.
Yeah, he manages to sell the Lilliputian cattle and sheep for a decent profit. Smart move. But that restlessness is still there, isn't it?
It seems incurable. He can't stay put.
Not for long. After just 5 months back home, the call of the sea, or maybe just the inability to fit back in, is too strong. He leaves his family again, takes command of a ship called the Adventure, bound for Surat.
And so begins part 2. A voyage to Brobdingnag, where the tables are completely turned, scale-wide.
Absolutely. If Lilliput made him feel like a giant, Brobdingnag is about to make him feel terrifyingly small. The world literally gets turned upside down.
So he's captain of the Adventure, sets sail June 20th, 1702. Things go okay initially.
Fair winds at first, yeah. But then, near the Cape of Good Hope, another storm hits, followed by this really unnerving perfect calm. One of his experienced sailors warns him that's often a bad sign.
And it is.
Oh, yeah. The very next day, a violent southern monsoon kicks in. It's that familiar pattern for Gulliver. Adventure calls, disaster follows, usually unexpected and dramatic.
And this time, the disaster is colossal.
Literally. They need fresh water, so a group goes ashore. While Gulliver's wandering off a bit, he sees his crew frantically rowing back to the ship. They're being pursued by this huge creature wading out into the sea after them.
And they just leave him.
They leave him, utterly alone, abandoned on this vast, unknown coastline. It's that recurring theme, again, abandoned by his own kind, left completely vulnerable.
So stranded again. What does he find when he ventures inland?
He finds what looks like a road, but it's really just a footpath for giants. He walks through a field of barley that's 40 feet high. The hedges fencing it are 120 feet tall.
Just impossible to even picture properly.
Right. He tries to climb over a stile, like steps over a fence, but each step is 6 feet high. The sheer, overwhelming scale of this place hits him immediately. It's the complete opposite of Lilliput.
And then he meets one of the inhabitants.
His first encounter. Terrifying. He spots a reaper in the field and describes him as being as tall as an ordinary spire steeple, taking strides that are 10 yards long.
10 yards.
Gulliver is hit with utmost fear and astonishment. He dives into the corn to hide. Then 7 more of these enormous figures appear, carrying reaping hooks the size of 6 scythes. The power dynamic is instantly, terrifyingly reversed. He's the tiny one now.
And he gets caught.
He does. The farmer, the first reaper he saw, spots him moving in the barley. He picks Gulliver up, quite gently actually, between his thumb and forefinger. Examines him closely, thinking he's some kind of small, dangerous animal.
Does Gulliver struggle?
No, he's smart enough not to. Even though the pressure hurts him, he stays still. It's total helplessness. Complete flip from Lilliput, where he was the one doing the picking up.
So the farmer takes him home. What's the family's reaction?
The wife screams at first, as women in England do at the sight of a toad or a spider, Gulliver says, a very visceral, maybe understandable reaction to something so small and alien. But then she calms down as she watches him.
So maybe some recognition of him as something other than just a pest?
Perhaps. There's this shared meal scene. Huge food, obviously. He drinks from what they call a small dram cup, but it holds 2 gallons. They all laugh when he makes an English toast. A little moment of connection, despite the size difference. He also trips over a bread crust on the table, a constant reminder of how out of scale he is. Then comes a slightly alarming moment with the farmer's son.
Oh yeah, the arch boy.
About 10 years old. He grabs Gulliver by the legs and dangles him, which terrifies Gulliver. The father gets angry and is about to punish the boy.
But Gulliver steps in?
Surprisingly, yes. He remembers how cruel kids can be to small animals, sparrows, rabbits, kittens, and asks the father not to punish him. It shows Gulliver still have empathy, even while being treated like a small creature himself. It's an interesting moment.
And the actual animals in the house must be terrifying.
Unimaginably huge. The mistress's cat is 3 times larger than an ox. Its purr sounds like a dozen stocking weavers working. Gulliver decides his best strategy is to show no fear, just walks boldly past it.
Brave man. What about rats?
Even worse. He describes rats of the size of a large mastiff. He actually has to fight 2 of them off with his hanger, his little sword, and manages to kill one. It's this constant struggle for survival, even against household pests.
It's around this time he has that realization about perception and beauty, isn't it?
Yes, a really key aha moment. He reflects on the fair skins of our English ladies. He realizes they only look beautiful because we see them at our own scale.
He remembers looking at his own skin through a magnifying glass in Lilliput.
Exactly. And his Lilliputian friend was shocked by the imperfections. The pores like holes, the beard hairs like bristles. It makes Gulliver understand that beauty, ugliness, perfection, it's all relative. It depends entirely on your perspective, your scale. It's a major philosophical insight for him.
Amidst all this danger and philosophical reflection, he does find a friend, though.
He does, thankfully. The farmer's 9-year-old daughter, Glumdalclitch. She takes him under her wing, becomes his devoted carer, his nurse and protector.
She seems genuinely fond of him.
Very much so. She's upset at the idea of him being shown off for money, really cares about his well-being and, interestingly, his honor. It's a genuinely tender relationship that gives him some safety and comfort.
But the farmer still sees a business opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. A friend gives him the idea. So he starts taking Gulliver to market towns, puts him on display, advertises him as this strange creature, smaller than their smallest animal, the splacknuck, but perfectly formed like a human who can talk and do tricks.
Must have been exhausting and humiliating for Gulliver.
He says it was. Performing constantly, being treated purely as a spectacle, an object for profit, it really strips away his dignity.
This leads to a much bigger journey, right? To the capital.
Yes, the farmer decides to take him on a tour, eventually heading to the metropolis. It's an epic journey, 3,000 miles, takes 10 weeks. Glumdalclitch carries him the whole way in this special box she made, padded and safe.
3,000 miles in a box.
Yeah. He describes crossing rivers much bigger than the Nile or the Ganges. The scale just keeps getting more overwhelming, constantly reinforcing his own insignificance.
And this journey culminates in him being noticed by royalty.
Exactly. Word reaches the court. A royal messenger, a slurdrel, arrives and commands the farmer to bring Gulliver to entertain the queen. So he goes from being a local sideshow attraction to a potential royal curiosity. Still an object, though.
How does the meeting with the queen go?
He plays it very formally, falls on his knees, asks to kiss her foot. She's quite gracious, offers him her little finger instead. She's immediately charmed, fascinated by him.
And she buys him.
She does, for 1,000 pieces of gold. A huge sum for the farmer in their currency, though Gulliver calculates it's worth less back in England, always that comparative perspective.
And crucially, he makes sure Glumdalclitch stays with him.
Yes, that's his one condition, really.
Yeah.
He pleads with the queen to let Glumdalclitch stay in her service as his nurse and teacher. The queen agrees immediately.
And his goodbye to the farmer is quite cold.
Remarkably so. It shows a real shift in him. He's experienced being property, being bought and sold. He's no longer just the farmer's pet project. He's asserting his own needs, demanding his companion stay with him. He understands the power dynamics differently now.
Now he has to deal with the king, who sounds like a more serious character.
Very much so. The king is learned, philosophical, and initially very skeptical. He suspects the whole story is a hoax, cooked up by the farmer and Glumdalclitch.
Doesn't believe Gulliver is real.
Or at least not what he claims to be. He consults 3 of his top scholars. They examine Gulliver closely, his teeth, his proportions, and conclude he's a relplum skullcatch. Basically, a lusus naturae, a freak of nature.
A scientific anomaly.
Exactly. They argue he couldn't possibly survive naturally at his size, couldn't find food or defend himself. He must be some kind of aborted creature, an accident. It's a great satirical poke at academic dogma, refusing to accept evidence that contradicts its theories.
But Gulliver argues his case.
Passionately. He insists he comes from a land where every people, animals, houses are his size, all in proportion.
Yeah.
The king, who Gulliver notes has a much better understanding than his scholars, is intrigued. He questions the farmer and Glumdalclitch privately.
And he's eventually convinced.
He is. He accepts Gulliver's story and ensures Glumdalclitch continues to care for him. provides her with an apartment near the Queen's and has a special room built for Gulliver 16 feet square, fully furnished to his scale. It shows the king's intellectual curiosity and willingness to accept the extraordinary, unlike the rigid scholars.
So life at court begins. Safer, maybe, but still peculiar. His custom-made room sounds amazing.
It's described in detail. The ceiling lifts off, the walls are quilted so he doesn't hurt himself if he falls. Tiny furniture, silver dishes like dollhouse items, not much bigger than what I've seen in a London toy shop. It's luxurious confinement tailored to his bizarre situation.
Dining must still be terrifying, though.
Always. He talks about the Queen eating using knives twice as long as a scythe. He says watching 10 or 12 of these giant knives and forks being lifted at once was so terrible a sight. Everyday actions remain overwhelming, scary even, because of the scale.
But the king engages him intellectually.
Regularly. The king is fascinated by Europe. He constantly asks Gulliver about manners, religion, laws, government, and learning back home. This really sets the stage for the core philosophical debates of this section.
And Gulliver initially defends Europe proudly.
Oh, yes. He calls England our noble country, the mistress of arts and arms. He feels indignant when the king starts expressing contempt. But something starts to shift inside Gulliver.
A psychological change.
A really significant one. He starts to doubt himself. He sees how ridiculous, how tiny and comical he must look next to these magnificent Brobdingnagians. He says he began to imagine myself dwindled many degrees below my usual size.
He even laughs at himself in the mirror.
Yeah, the Queen holds him up to a mirror, and he can't help but smile ironically at his own reflection. This internal shift, this questioning of his own inherent value and superiority, is arguably more profound than any physical danger he faces.
Speaking of dangers, court life isn't entirely safe. There's the Queen's dwarf.
Right. The dwarf is only 30 feet tall, tiny by their standards, but still huge compared to Gulliver. And he's incredibly jealous of the attention Gulliver gets.
So he plays tricks on him.
Cruel ones, like wedging Gulliver into a marrowbone during dinner. Humiliating and potentially dangerous.
Yeah.
It just highlights Gulliver's constant vulnerability, even from someone relatively small in that world.
And the natural world remains a threat, too. The wasps.
Terrifying. He describes them being as large as partridges. They swarm around his cake. They're buzzing louder than bagpipes. He actually fights them off with his hanger, killing 4 of them. Shows his resilience, but also the constant peril.
The dwarf gets him again in the garden.
Yeah.
With apples.
Yes, shakes apples off a tree onto Gulliver's head. And these apples are near as large as a Bristol barrel. Funny image, but could have seriously hurt him. Danger lurks everywhere.
Then comes the monkey incident. That sounds truly frightening.
It's a major event. A monkey grabs him out of his box, thinks he's a baby monkey, holds him like a nurse feeding a child, tries to cram food in his mouth.
Oh.
Then it climbs up onto the roof, carrying him, and finally drops him onto a ridge tile, hundreds of yards above the ground. He's eventually rescued, but it's a terrifying and deeply humiliating experience. He later tries to spin it as an act of bravery to the king, trying to preserve some dignity.
Despite all this, he still shows his cleverness sometimes. Making things.
He does. He makes a comb using the king's beard shavings. The bristles are thick enough. He makes a little purse and 2 chairs out of the queen's hair. It shows his resourcefulness, his ability to adapt materials, and constantly reminds us of the scale difference.
These incidents happen alongside the big philosophical talks with the king, where Gulliver tries to defend Europe.
Right. He argues that reason isn't tied to body size. He points to bees and ants in England as examples of small but industrious creatures. He tries to paint a glowing picture of English institutions, Parliament, the courts, the treasury, the army.
But the king isn't buying it.
Not at all. And his critique is absolutely devastating. This is the huge philosophical turning point. The king looks at English history, which Gulliver has presumably recounted, and sees only a heap of conspiracies, rebellions, murders, massacres, revolutions, banishments.
He dismisses the laws, the army.
Calls the army mercenary, the laws flawed and manipulated. And his final conclusion about humanity is just brutal. The most pernicious race of little odious vermin that nature ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth.
Wow. That's harsh. Must have been incredibly humbling for Gulliver.
Completely turns his worldview upside down. All his patriotic pride is just demolished by this giant, supposedly barbaric king's rational assessment.
And in a misguided attempt to impress the king, Gulliver makes that shocking offer.
The gunpowder offer, it's astonishing. He tries to win back favor by offering to teach the king how to make gunpowder. He describes its destructive power in graphic detail, tearing up streets, blowing up houses, killing indiscriminately. thinking this display of European ingenuity will impress him.
Which shows Gulliver's own moral blind spot, really.
Completely. He's so ingrained in the European mindset where power and destruction are seen as advancements.
But the king's reaction is the opposite.
Total horror.
Yeah.
He's struck with horror. He absolutely rejects the offer. This is the major moral reversal. The barbarian king shows far greater morality than civilized Gulliver. The king is appalled that such a impotent and groveling an insect could harbor such infernal principles.
He values sense and justice over power and intrigue.
Exactly. He hates mystery, refinement, and intrigue in rulers. He believes in common sense and reason, to justice and lenity. It's a profound condemnation of the darker side of European progress.
And their own military reflects this simpler ideal.
Very much so. Their army isn't made of professionals. It's citizens, farmers, landowners. So the commanders are nobles who serve out of duty without pay. They're disciplined, yes, but it's a civic militia, not a tool for conquest. It reinforces the king's preference for a simpler, more virtuous society.
After Gulliver's been there 2 years, the king has that strange idea about propagation.
Yeah, it's a bit weird. The king muses about finding Gulliver a female of his own size so they could propagate the breed, start a little colony of tiny people.
Gulliver's not thrilled.
Horrified. The thought of his descendants being kept in cages like tame canary birds is appalling to him. He wants out, not to become a permanent zoo exhibit.
And his escape is pure accident, isn't it? Another twist.
Completely unexpected. They're on a trip to the coast. Glumdalclitch gets sick. Gulliver pretends to be sick too, asks to be taken down to the seashore in his traveling box for some fresh air. He falls asleep.
And an eagle snatches the box.
Exactly. The eagle grabs the ring on top of the box, probably thinking it's a tortoise or some other prey, and flies off with it.
Incredible. But then it drops him.
Other eagles attack the first one. And in the fight, it drops the box. It falls straight down for above a minute, he says, before hitting the sea with a terrible squash.
But the box floats.
Miraculously, yes. The joints were so well made, the door fits so tightly that not much water gets in. Brobdingnagian craftsmanship saves him. So he's just floating, trapped in his box in the middle of the ocean.
Talk about being vulnerable again. How does he get rescued?
He manages to open a little vent in the roof, sticks his handkerchief out on a stick, and shouts for help. Eventually, a passing English ship spots the floating box and hoists aboard. Captain Thomas Wilcox this time.
Safe at last. But the experience has changed him permanently.
Absolutely. The perceptual shift is profound and lasting. The English sailors are amazed by him, naturally. But Gulliver is equally amazed by them. He sees them as pygmies.
He's still seeing through Brobdingnagian eyes.
Completely. He calls his own countrymen little, contemptible creatures. The shift is so ingrained that when he gets home, he instinctively stoops to go through doorways, has trouble hugging his wife because he thinks she's too short. His perception of scale is fundamentally broken.
Does he manage to convince this captain his story is true? He must have some souvenirs.
He does. First, he shows the captain the tiny Lilliputian animals in gold. Then he pulls out his Brobdingnagian collection. The comb made from the king's beard, giant pins and needles, wasp stings, the queen's gold ring, that cup made from the maid of honor's corn.
The corn cup.
Yes, and even breeches made from a mouse's skin. Bizarre, but undeniable proof of his incredible voyages.
So he arrives home June 3rd, 1706. But it's a troubled homecoming.
Deeply troubled. He just can't readjust. He's profoundly alienated. He finds the smell of his wife and children intolerable. Can't bear them touching his food.
That's incredibly sad. Where does he find comfort?
His only solace is in the stables, with his 2 young horses. It's a poignant image. He prefers the company of animals now, perhaps seeing in them some echo of the rational Hunnams he's yet to meet, or just finding humans repulsive after his experiences. He's utterly estranged.
And that sets us up for part 3. A voyage into the realms of abstract intellect and its downsides.
Exactly. Lakuta, Balnibarbi, and beyond, where intellect takes some very strange and ultimately unproductive turns.
So Gulliver's back, but profoundly changed, deeply restless. He can't stay put. Third voyage begins.
Right. He sets out again, this time as captain of the adventure, August 2nd, 1710. And guess what happens?
Let me guess. Mutiny.
You got it. His crew conspires against him, locks him up, eventually maroons him on yet another unknown shore. Betrayal by his own kind seems to be Gulliver's constant fate.
So, abandoned again. What does he find this time?
Something truly bizarre. Laputa, the flying island. A complete shift from the giants. Now we're into this realm of detached, floating intellect.
A flying island. How does that even work? We'll get to that. First, the people.
The Laputans, they are immediately striking. Their clothes are decorated with figures of suns, moons, stars, musical instruments, and they have this unique custom, the flappers.
Flappers, like on a table.
Sort of. Servants carry these blown blighters on sticks with dried keys or pebbles inside, and they gently tap their masters on the mouth when they need to speak, or on the ear when they need to listen, because the Laputans are constantly lost in intense speculations, deep mathematical or musical contemplation. They literally need someone to physically remind them to pay attention to the outside world. It perfectly captures their intellectual abstraction and, frankly, their impracticality.
His first meeting with the king must be strange then.
Completely. The king is deep in some problem, needs his flapper just to notice Gulliver is there. And when Gulliver signals he doesn't need a flapper himself, the king and the whole court immediately get a very mean opinion of my understanding.
Because he's not lost in thought.
Exactly. Their values are totally inverted. Practical awareness is seen as a sign of low intellect. It shows their profound disconnect from reality.
And their food reflects this obsession too.
Oh, absolutely. Meals are an exercise in geometry and music. Food is cut into equilateral triangles, rhomboids, cycloids. Musical instruments are presented alongside dishes. Bread is shaped into cones, cylinders, parallelograms.
It's intellectualism taken to an absurd extreme in everyday life.
Precisely. And it extends to everything, even tailoring. The tailor takes Gulliver's measurements with a quadrant and compasses.
Sounds precise.
But he makes a mistake in the calculation, and the clothes come out ill-fitting and badly shaped. And Gulliver notes this kind of incompetence is very frequent and little regarded. They despise practical geometry, practical application. Their brilliance is purely theoretical.
And the island itself. How does it fly, and why are they so anxious?
Right, the island floats, hovers over the land below, Balnabarby. They believe in the music of the spheres, but they're also plagued by continual disquietudes, constant anxiety about cosmic disasters. The sun burning out, comets hitting the Earth falling into the sun.
So their advanced knowledge causes fear, not comfort.
Ironically, yes. Their astronomy is advanced, but it just fuels their anxieties. And they interact with the mainland. Strangely, petitions and supplies are pulled up on strings. Total detachment.
What are the Laputans like, character-wise?
Obsessed with maths and music, perpetually conversant in lines and figures. They describe beauty geometrically, but physically they're clumsy, awkward, and unhandy. Their houses are badly built because practical geometry is beneath them. They're poor reasoners outside their narrow fields, lacking imagination, fancy, and invention. Their minds are shut up in abstraction.
Okay, the mechanics. How does the island actually fly?
Gulliver explains it. It's circular, thick, made of adamant. And underneath, in a central cave, there's a huge lodestone, a giant magnet shaped like a weaver's shuttle. By tilting this magnet, using its attracting and repelling ends relative to minerals in the ground below, they can move the island up, down, and sideways across the kingdom.
Clever in a way, but are there limits?
Yes. It can only operate over the king's dominions on the continent below, where the right minerals exist. And it can't go higher than 4 miles. Their astronomers have theories about magnetic virtue and opposing forces. It's a fantastical device, grounded in pseudoscientific explanation.
Despite their abstract nature, they have real power over the land below.
Terrifying power. This is a chilling aspect. If a town on the mainland rebels, the king can hover the island over it and first rain down huge stones.
Okay, that's bad.
If that doesn't work, the ultimate punishment is to slowly lower the island directly onto the town, crushing it completely. Universal destruction. It shows the tyrannical potential of detached intellectual power.
Can anything stop that?
Thankfully, yes. There's a practical constraint. If a town has very tall, strong rock spirals or towers, lowering the island could crack its adamantine bottom, causing it to fall. The people below know this, so it acts as a check on the king's power. A subtle form of resistance based on understanding the system's limits.
Gulliver gets tired of these guys pretty quickly, right?
Very weary. He finds their conversation incredibly dull outside of maths and music. He can only really talk to the women, the tradesmen, the flappers, the pages, people less consumed by abstraction. He finds the whole atmosphere stifling.
So he asks to leave the flying island.
Yes. Requests permission to go down to Balnabarby, the continent below. He's immensely relieved to be back on firm ground. A real appreciation for the tangible after all that floating abstraction.
But Balnabarby itself isn't exactly thriving.
No, it's a stark contrast. As soon as he lands, he sees the problem. The land is mostly barren, rocky, neglected. Houses are in ruins. Hardly any crops or grass, except
Except for his host's estate.
exactly. One particular lord, Lord Menotti, who takes him in, has a beautifully managed, prosperous estate. It stands out dramatically against the surrounding ruin. Immediately signals something is wrong with the country as a
And
whole.
the host explains why it's all gone
He
wrong.
does. About 40 years earlier, some people from Balnabarbi visited Laputa. They came back full of these grand new theoretical ideas about agriculture, architecture, everything. Inspired, they set up the Grand Academy of Legato.
An academy to implement these new ideas.
Exactly, with grand promises. One man doing the work of 10, palaces built in a week, fruit ripening in any season, harvests increased 100-fold. The typical utopian dream of progress through pure reason.
But the reality.
Total disaster. Lord Menotti admits the projects are wholly unaccountable, nonsensical, and they've ruined the country. His own estate thrives precisely because he ignored the academy and stuck to the old fashion of farming and building. It's a damning indictment of theory divorced from practice.
And Gulliver visits this academy. The projects are just wild.
Utterly absurd. Swift is having a field day satirizing the Royal Society and scientific pursuits of his time. There's the famous one, extracting sunbeams from cucumbers to bottle them up for winter.
Sunbeams from cucumbers.
Trying to calcine ice back into gunpowder, building houses starting from the roof and working down, teaching spiders to spin silk, feeding them colored flies for dyed thread, plowing fields by burying acorns and nuts and letting pigs dig them up.
It's all completely donkers.
Condensing air into a solid, softening marble for pillows, petrifying horse hooves while the horse is alive, trying to breed sheep with no wool, sowing land with chaff instead of seed. It's just relentless satire on useless, impractical research.
And the projects in speculative learning are just as bad. The language stuff.
Even more abstractly ridiculous. There's the professor with the engine, this big frame full of wooden blocks with all the words in the language on them. You turn cranks, the blocks rearrange randomly, and supposedly it generates sentences, writing books on philosophy, poetry, maths, without any effort or genius.
Mechanizing thought itself.
Precisely. Then there's the project to shorten language by cutting out verbs and adjectives, leaving only nouns, because all things imaginable are but nouns. Utterly reductive.
And the most extreme one, abolish words altogether.
Yes, the ultimate scheme for efficiency. Argued it would be healthier for the lungs too. People should just carry around bundles of objects representing what they want to talk about.
Leading to scholars lugging huge sacks of stuff.
Exactly. Struggling to communicate. And Swift throws in a brilliant satirical twist. It was the women, in conjunction with the vulgar and illiterate, who rebelled against this, insisting on the right to speak with their tongues. Common sense versus academic folly.
The political projectors are no better, curing political problems with medicine.
Yeah, a doctor suggests physicians should diagnose the humors of politicians in the Senate and prescribe cures. Another idea. Make senators vote opposite to how they argued, assuming their true intent is the contrary.
And reconciling enemies by swapping half their brains.
Literally, saw their heads open, swap half the brain from one opponent to the other, stitch them back up. Believing this physical melding would create political harmony. It's Swift mocking simplistic solutions to complex human problems.
The taxation ideas are also biting, taxing wit and politeness based on self-assessment.
Which would obviously lead to everyone claiming vast amounts. But crucially, no tax on honor, wisdom, or learning, because no man will either allow them in his neighbor or value them in himself. Cynical, but probably true. And women taxed on beauty and coquetry, of course.
And that final dark twist about discovering plots through anagrams?
Oh yeah, deciphering conspiracies from innocent-sounding phrases like, our brother Tom has just got the piles, secretly meaning resist, the plot is brought home. It's a sharp jab at government paranoia, the tendency to see conspiracies everywhere, and the absurdity of cryptanalysis taken to extremes.
After Legato, Gulliver moves on to Glubdubdrib, the island of sorcerers.
Yes, where the governor has the power of necromancy, he can summon the dead. And this allows Gulliver and Swift to directly interrogate history.
And what he finds is pretty disillusioning. This is a major revelation, right?
Huge. He asks to speak with figures like Alexander, Hannibal, Caesar, Pompey, Brutus, then later Homer, Aristotle, Descartes, Gassendi. He finds out that history books are full of lies. Courageous deeds attributed to cowards, wise decisions credited to fools, vicious betrayals masked as loyalty. He discovers how many innocent and excellent persons have been condemned to death or banishment by the practicing of great ministers upon the corruption of judges and the malice of factions. The historical record is shown to be utterly corrupt.
He also looks into the origins of nobility and wealth.
Yes, he asks to see the ancestors of some modern nobles from his time. And the truth is scandalous. He sees fortunes built on perjury, oppression, subornation, fraud, panderism, and alike. Titles gained through treachery, poisoning flattering kings, prostituting wives and daughters. A devastating critique of hereditary aristocracy.
It's a really cynical view of human history and progress.
Deeply cynical. He contrasts the prostitute writers of modern times with the honest ancients. He laments how virtue seems to decline over generations, how noble families decay through vice and corruption, selling their votes and managing at elections. Swift is really hammering home the theme of moral decay.
From the Island of the Dead, he goes to Lugnag.
Right. Needs to get passage to Japan from there. He continues his disguise as a Dutchman, since only the Dutch were allowed into Japan then.
And the court etiquette in Lugnag is interesting.
Humiliating, really. To approach the king, you have to crawl on your belly and lick the floor in front of his throne. And sometimes, for people the king dislikes, the floor is deliberately sprinkled with dust beforehand. A little taste of subjugation.
But the main event in Lugnag is the discovery of the Struldbrugs. This is massive.
Absolutely massive. The Immortals. It's a huge twist. Gulliver learns that occasionally children are born here with a red spot on their forehead, which means they will never die.
And Gulliver's initial reaction is pure joy.
Ecstasy. He launches into this rapturous speech about how wonderful it must be, imagines living forever, accumulating infinite knowledge and wisdom, becoming a living repository of history, guiding the nation, forming a select group of immortals to perfect society. He sees only the positives.
He gets completely carried away with the fantasy of it.
Totally. He thinks they must be free from all passions, serene, benevolent, the ultimate beings.
But then comes the reality check. Another huge reversal.
The brutal reality. His hosts patiently explain the truth about the Struldbrugs. Yes, they don't die, but they do age. Horribly.
How so?
After 30, they become increasingly melancholic. By 80, they have all the diseases and infirmities of extreme old age, but with no hope of release through death. They become opinionative, peevish, covetous, morose, vain, talkative. They lose their memories, can't hold conversations.
They lose connection with the world.
Completely. Language changes, so after a couple of centuries, they can't even understand their own descendants. They become foreigners in their own country. They lose all affection, envy the dead, and are despised by everyone. They're legally considered dead at 80. Their heirs inherit. They're just miserable, decaying, immortal husks.
It's a horrifying picture, the opposite of his fantasy.
The complete nightmare. Swift utterly demolishes the romantic ideal of immortality. It becomes a curse, not a blessing, a state of perpetual suffering and decay.
And this profoundly changes Gulliver's view.
Instantly, his keen appetite for perpetuity of life was much abated. He says he would choose any death over such an existence. It's a powerful lesson about accepting mortality, about the natural cycle of life.
The Lugnagians even joke about sending Struldbrugs to cure foreigners of the fear of death.
Yes, and Gulliver agrees that their laws, which prevent Struldbrugs from owning property or holding power after 80, are very wise, because their endless old age makes them pathologically greedy and incapable. It's a pragmatic way of dealing with this unique, terrible situation.
So thoroughly disillusioned with immortality, Gulliver arranges passage to Japan.
Yes, continuing his Dutch disguise. He uses a letter of introduction from the King of Lugnag to get access.
And in Japan, he has to navigate that tricky ceremony, trampling the crucifix.
Right, a test the Japanese used to identify Christians who were persecuted. Gulliver, playing the Dutchman, cleverly pleads to be excused from the ceremony, citing his troubles and invoking the name of the King of Lugnag. And surprisingly, the Japanese officials grant his request. Shows his diplomatic skill using connections to avoid a dangerous situation.
And from Japan, he finally heads home.
Sails on a Dutch ship back to Amsterdam, then gets a passage to England. Arrives April 10th, 1710, 5.5 years away this time. Finds his family well again.
Ready for his fourth and perhaps most transformative voyage.
To the land of the Houyhnhnms. This is where everything comes to a head, where his alienation from humanity becomes complete.
He just can't stay home, can he? 5 months later, he's off again.
Restlessness, or maybe misanthropy by now. He accepts another captaincy, sails August 2nd, 1710, and, predictably,
Mutiny strikes again.
Déjà vu. Confined, then marooned. It's almost routine. The betrayal by his own species setting him up for encounters with others.
And this time, the first encounter is with the Yahoos.
Yes, these strange sort of animals, and the description is deliberately repulsive. Deformed, hairy, with claws, climbing trees, acting aggressively, filthy, stinking. Gulliver's disgusted and has to fight them off.
But they look disturbingly human.
That's the immediate, unsettling impression, a degraded, bestial form of humanity. It sets up the core conflict of this voyage.
Then he sees the horses.
The Houyhnhnms. And they are the complete opposite. Calm, clean, rational. He sees two of them interacting, seemingly communicating intelligently. He's utterly astonished. Thinks his brain is disturbed. Maybe it's magic.
Yeah.
He cannot process rational horses.
One of them, the gray steed, takes him in.
Leads him to its dwelling. A clean, orderly building, clearly designed by rational minds, but inhabited by horses. Gulliver's worldview is just shattering.
And inside, he sees the yahoos again, treated as animals.
Exactly. Tied up, working as beasts of burden, fed raw meat and roots. And the Master Houyhnhnm and his servant start comparing Gulliver to a yahoo.
It must be horrifying for Gulliver.
Devastating. They note his lack of body hair, the softness of his skin, the fact he walks on two legs, his clothes. They see the resemblance, even if Gulliver is cleaner and has rudimentary reason. He begs them not to call him a yahoo, utterly repulsed by the comparison. This is the start of his profound identity crisis.
He has trouble with the food at first, hay and oats.
Naturally, he can't eat their food. The Master Houyhnhnm shows concern, patiently teaches him words for things. Gulliver can eat milk, oats. Gulliver learns to make simple oat cakes. He adapts, starts living on this simple, healthy diet, notes he feels better without salt, seeing it as a human luxury. He's physically starting to align with them.
And he learns their language.
With incredible dedication. He desperately wants to understand them, communicate with them. He discovers their language is perfectly rational, logical, and crucially, it has no words for evil concepts like lying, deceit, jealousy.
No word for evil.
Only words derived from the Yahoo's flaws, their ugliness, their stupidity, their filthiness. That's their only concept of badness. His master is amazed. Gulliver can learn and reason, qualities unexpected in a Yahoo-like creature. But then Gulliver's secret is revealed when a servant sees him without his clothes, his false covering. He has to explain where he comes from.
And that explanation is damning for humanity.
Utterly. He tells his master that in his world, creatures like him are the only governing rational animals. He admits he was shocked to see Houyhnhnms acting rationally. The implication is stark. Humans are Yahoos who only pretend to be rational. Gulliver starts to internalize this view himself.
The idea of lying is completely foreign to the Houyhnhnms.
Fundamentally baffling. His master cannot comprehend saying the thing which was not. What's the point of speech, if not to convey truth? Lying just creates confusion and misunderstanding. For them, it's literally irrational, a huge contrast to human society.
Explaining how humans treat horses must be difficult.
Incredibly awkward. Gulliver tries to explain that the creatures the Houyhnhnms resemble are used for servitude in England, ridden, whipped, forced to pull loads, shod with iron. His master reacts with great indignation. It's unnatural, cruel from their perspective.
And explaining human society, war, law, money is almost impossible.
Because their language lacks the concepts. How do you explain war to beings who live in perfect peace based on reason? How do you explain law when they have no crime? Money when they share everything. Gulliver struggles, and the struggle itself exposes the flaws in human systems.
His description of the causes of war is particularly brutal.
A catalog of human absurdity. Wars fought over ambition, religion, territory, resources, revenge, flimsy alliances. Often for reasons the soldiers themselves don't even understand. He lays bare the utter irrationality of human conflict.
And the Houyhnhnm master is horrified.
Deeply. He concludes that humans must have some small degree of reason, but they use it only to aggravate their natural vices, making them far worse than irrational beasts like the Yahoos. Gulliver hears this and increasingly agrees.
He explains the legal profession, too. Lawyers who prove white is black and black is white according as they are paid.
Yes, painting a picture of utter corruption. How justice is manipulated, how precedent is used to obscure truth, how the innocent are ruined by lengthy, expensive court battles. It appalls the rational Houyhnhnm.
And money, the driving force of human society.
Incomprehensible to his master. Why hoard shiny rocks? Why should possession of these things give one power over others, or access to more resources than needed? It violates their principle that nature provides enough for all.
Gulliver details the extravagance, too. Food, clothes, houses.
Yes, the endless cycle of luxury, trade, consumption. The joke about needing to circle the globe 3 times for a lady's breakfast. The hundreds of trades needed just to clothe and house people, all driven by greed and vanity, utterly alien to the Houyhnhnms' simple, needs-based life.
And politics. Ministers getting power through betrayal and bribery.
He spares no detail. describes how ministers rise by corruption, maintain power through more corruption, then retire rich, leaving behind apprentices in vice. A scathing indictment of the entire political class seen through the lens of pure reason.
In contrast, Huinum's society is presented as perfect.
An ideal of rational virtue. They are governed solely by reason, which isn't debatable for them, it's self-evident. They have a natural disposition to friendship, benevolence, order. No disagreement, no opinions, just rational conviction.
Their family life is based on reason, too, not love.
Purely rational. They choose mates carefully based on health and temperament to produce strong offspring. One male, one female for life. No romance, no jealousy, no excess affection. Even affection for offspring is communal. They care for all young equally. Marriage is arranged logically by friends and family.
How are the young educated?
Rigorously. Trained in strength, speed, endurance, temperance, industry, cleanliness. Rewarded with praise and songs, not things. Yahoos are sometimes present at their exercises, a constant negative example.
They even have a national assembly.
Every 4 years, representatives need to discuss resource distribution, population balance, even arranging exchanges of children between families if one district has too many males or females. Everything managed rationally for the common good.
Their lives are simple, long, virtuous.
Very. Simple tools, practical buildings, excellent poetry based on observation, no disease, just peaceful death from old age. Their only concept of evil comes from the Yahoos. It's presented as a utopia of pure reason.
And Gulliver completely buys into it. He wants to stay forever.
Totally embraces it. He feels love and veneration for them, resolves never to return to humankind. He feels healthy, mentally calm, free from all human vices. Their conversation is purely intellectual, about nature, reason, friendship. He has found his ideal.
But there's a final devastating twist, the council's decision.
The Women Grand Assembly debates his presence. And despite his master arguing for him, the consensus is he has to go.
Why? He's embraced their ways.
Because they reason. He is still fundamentally Yahoo. He possesses reason, yes, but it's coupled with Yahoo passions and potential for vice. They fear he might organize the local Yahoos, teach them rudimentary skills, and lead a rebellion. He's a potential danger to their perfect, rational society.
That must crush Gulliver.
Utterly. He's struck dumb. Begs to stay even as a servant to the servants. The thought of returning to human society, which he now despises, is unbearable. His rejection by his adopted ideal is heartbreaking.
But they insist he has to build a boat.
His master, though sad, enforces the council's decision, gives him 2 months, helps him build a small canoe using timber and, poignantly, Yahoo skins sewn together, using the remnants of his rejected species to leave paradise.
The farewell is emotional.
Deeply, Gulliver kisses his master's hoof, and the master, in a gesture that brings their usual reserve, gently raises Gulliver's hoof to his mouth, a sign of real affection, which Gulliver notes is almost scandalous for a Huinum to show to an inferior. It highlights the genuine bond, making the departure even more painful.
So he leaves, gets picked up by a Portuguese ship, Captain Pedro de Mendes,
who is remarkably kind and patient. But Gulliver is completely broken. He sees the human sailors as repulsive Yahoos. He can barely stand their smell, their presence. He even speaks with a horse's neigh. His alienation is absolute.
Even back in Lisbon, he struggles.
Can't bear human company. Hides his story about the Huinums, fearing he'll be locked up as mad. The smell of humans is intolerable.
And the final return to England, to his family.
The final tragedy. He cannot endure them. His wife, his children, their touch, their smell repulses him. He buys 2 horses, spends his time in the stable talking to them. That's his only comfort. Complete and utter estrangement from his own kind.
In his closing thoughts, Gulliver insists he's telling the truth, wants travelers to swear oaths.
Yes, claims his purpose is to inform and not to amuse. Says his time with the Huinums has made him incapable of lying. It's Swift's final ironic layer, the teller of fantastical lies, claims absolute veracity, driven by his encounter with pure reason.
And he includes that sharp critique of colonialism.
Dismisses conquering Lilliput as pointless. Brobdingnag is impossible. Then launches into a tirade against the usual colonial practices, seizing land, enslaving or murdering natives, all under false pretenses. A powerful anti-imperialist statement for its time.
And his very final word is on human pride.
The ultimate vice. He cannot understand how humans, these lumps of deformity and diseases, can be smitten with pride. He notes the Huinums don't even have a word for it because it's so irrational, so evil. That's the ultimate condemnation. Pride is the defining, damning flaw of humanity, the thing that separates them irrevocably from the rational ideal he found and lost. A truly bleak ending.
And there you have it. Thanks for spending a little bit of your day with us in this story. If you enjoyed it, a simple like or subscribe helps the channel out more than you know. Be good and take care.